Well, hello, this one's on a very small but interesting file called cmdline in /proc. When your system starts, you will typically see the grub boot menu. Now, if you don't touch anything, depending on your Linux distro, it will continue to boot after any number of seconds, usually between 5 and 30. But if you want to, you can edit the configuration before it continues to boot. And if you do, you can add an argument to the kernel. So this will change the way your system boots. This can be handy if you want to debug or run recovery operations. And after your system is booted, there's a very nice file that can tell you how the kernel was loaded. And this file is called cmdline in /proc. Now, there are many arguments you can pass on to the kernel, but important to realize is that they're all temporary settings if you do it via this boot menu. So to keep it simple, we'll check out two popular ones. And the first one is quiet, and the second one will be init equals bin bash. With quiet, you suppress most of the output that the system generates at boot time. And the second argument will simply start a bash shell, and that's it. So you can then troubleshoot and reset your system when you're done. Now let's have a look at both of them. Now I'm using KVM as my hypervisor, and I've got a couple of virtual machines, and I'm going to reset one of them. So I see the grub boot menu, and I can either go for the default kernel or for the rescue kernel. And we also see that we can edit the kernel line using E. So we type E. Now I see 5 lines, and I go down to the 4th line, which is the kernel line. And I add quiet as an argument. And it also tells us that we can use Ctrl X to continue the boot process. So when we do that, we see very little output. So I open up a terminal on my desktop and I connect to this virtual machine. And when I check the cmdline file, I see that the kernel was loaded with the quiet argument. Now let's do it again. And I go back to my hypervisor and I reset my VM. At the boot menu, I edit the kernel line once more, but now I add init equals bin bash. This means that the boot process will only start a bash shell and I will be able to troubleshoot. I press Ctrl X and after a second I'm in a bash shell. And again I check cmdline. Now keep in mind that editing the kernel line is always a temporary setting. To make a permanent change, you will have to edit the grub configuration. And we're done.